Welcome back, everybody, to the Informed Home Buyer Podcast. I'm your host, Rich Curtis, and I've got my co-host with me, as always, Dave Miller. Morning, Dave.
Good morning, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Is it morning or it just hit afternoon? Good afternoon, Dave.
Yeah, good afternoon to you.
So today we're going to be going over one bright spot in the news. We've got some good CPI data for you. We're going to be going over a bunch of economic and financial things that are going to converge in the month of July that could be a perfect storm for house price decreases, depending on how we all react to the uncertainty and to our feelings around that, because of course we're in a confidence-based market. So we're going to go through what all those events are, the right way to frame your thinking around those, and we're going to bring this all together with what's the effect going to be on the housing market, what's the effect going to be on interest rates, and how do you, sitting there right now as a buyer or seller, make decisions about this summer buying and selling season, easy for me to say. How do you make decisions about the summer buying and selling season, and who should be thinking about buying and selling and who should be staying on the fence, so you can start to make some informed decisions. So I'm going to start off by handing it off to Dave. Dave, you get the honors of giving what may be one of the few little good pieces of financial news we've been able to deliver on the pod in a few months here. So what have you got for us?
Well, what I got today is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, came out today. And for those that haven't been listening to our pods here, is the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is really the indicator, or one of the main indicators that the Federal Reserve uses to monitor inflation. And last week, our pod, we had some clips of the Fed Chair Jerome Powell talking about where the Fed fund rate was and why they decided to hold rates where they were at the 4 to 4.25 level. And the reason why he said so is that the Fed has that two-tiered charter, dual mandate of managing inflation and managing unemployment. So the consensus, or the desire, was from the we'll just say from the White House, was that he was to lower rates. But the lagging indicators didn't support. So he was monitoring inflation, and inflation was still high at 2.4. And he wanted to get more data to see that it was trending. For those of us that are watching, these tariffs and the on again, off again tariffs, there was an anticipation that the CPI number was going to come out at 2.4 or higher. And it actually came out today at 2.3. Now it's a lagging indicator. It's for April. We're in May, so it's mid-May. This covered April at 2.3, which is a positive sign for inflation. So we anticipated that number to be elevated 2.4 or higher, which would create additional lag time before the Federal Reserve would consider lowering rates. So this is a bright spot in what you kicked this off, Rich, that it is good news that inflation is coming down. There are some goods and services that are still elevated, but there are plenty of goods and services that are coming down. So it's really a balanced effect of looking at those.
Yeah. All right. So let me give you my thoughts on that, and you tell me whether you agree or not. What the Fed has been doing to manage inflation in terms of keeping the federal funds rate high and selling bonds off the balance sheet has been working. This is a number that indicates that it's been working, and they have effectively been bringing inflation down. Would you agree?
That is correct. Yes, 100%.
Now, the lagging indicator nature of this number means it's not necessarily reflective of where we're at or where we're going. So a lot of people, a lot of economists, a lot of folks who are interpreting these numbers think there's sort of a couple things going on here, which is one, the tariffs being paused didn't bring all of the pain all at once. So we're not seeing that wash through the data, quite yet. In terms of the inflation. And also there was a lot of pre-buying of goods in anticipation of the tariffs coming into effect. So people businesses started loading up on goods from overseas, especially from China, to try to get ahead of the tariffs. So they still have stock on hand that they can sell at their standard prices. And it's really the next round of numbers when they're going to have to sell post-tariff goods at post-tariff prices that we're going to see that CPI number tick up as anticipated.
Yep, that was an accurate assessment. And for that lagging level of goods or supplies that sellers have, they did not raise the price on those, obviously. And I think there was some anticipation too that there was going to be some increased prices in anticipation to the tariffs of the new inventory coming over. from these countries, and just about every country that had an elevated tariff applied to it at different levels. But that inventory existed, and suppliers or sellers did not put a premium on that existing inventory. Um,
Yeah. So while we may have seen some individual price gouging here or there, some industries raising prices in advance, we didn't see that across the board in a way that affected the basket of goods that the CPI bases its estimates on. So that's
yep,
also good. That's also good news that these companies seem to be playing this straight relatively.
yep. And then that brings up, and I don't know if timing's appropriate for this, but when are we going to see that shortage of goods, right, Rich? Like,
Yeah.
there had to be a pause at some point, and we felt like, there was some real pain felt from both the exporting countries and us as an importing country, that these large tariffs were in place, and there was a pause for some period of time. And I think you could speak to that in terms of when we may see, lack of inventory or short supply on our shelves.
Yeah, when we say lack of inventory, we mean things to buy, not houses. I mean, we're going to get to houses and all of
Mhm.
the follow-on effects and how this affects your housing decisions after we lay the groundwork here. But yeah, the global trade is a massively confusing and complex industry, and it's really based on keeping a steady flow of goods coming in through the port system. And we saw a complete breakdown of that during the pandemic, and that's what led to shortages and inflation and price gouging, and people buying 400 rolls of toilet paper. So we're seeing a similar thing happen where last Friday we're overall down. The ports of the two major ports in LA are seeing between the two of them between a 31 and a 40% reduction overall in container ships coming into port. So that equals a 31 to 40% or more reduction in goods, depending on what kind of ships they would have been and how much each ship would have been bringing. But that's a ship volume number, not a goods volume number. So the real goods volume number is going to be a little variable off that, but 30 to 40% less ships coming in. And there was a 12-hour period last Friday where not a single ship left port in China heading for the west coast of the United States. Now, sitting here and not being a global shipping expert, a 12-hour window of no ships leaving sounds like who cares? But to put it in perspective, we haven't seen that since COVID. We haven't seen that level of disruption in the supply chain since the pandemic. And a 12-hour period of no ships leaving China is a significant newsworthy event in terms of global trade and global commerce. And what that could look like in terms of shelf shortages is, Trump yesterday, or his trade secretary was able to broker a deal whereby they reduced the American side of the tariffs to 30%, Chinese side of the tariffs to 10%, and that hopefully will mean that some ships will start leaving. So let's say those ships were idling offshore and ready to put the hammer down yesterday. If they did that, it's going to take them 22 to 30 days to cross the ocean and get into port, and then it averages 3 to 4 weeks from the time the goods hit the port until the time they get to shelves. Now, bear in mind that that could get a lot worse because usually these things are trickling in a measured, anticipated way that are staffed up for, that the entire world knows exactly what's happening. You can go on the web and track these ships. You can see where they all are all over the world and what's going where. If put a vehicle, if you're going to move to Europe and you put a vehicle on a container ship, you can track your ship across the ocean. These are known quantities. Now all that got backed up and a lot's going to hit the port at the same time. So those 3 to 4 week averages or normals, in my opinion, are probably going to get longer. But let's just work with the averages. That would mean early to mid-July before we start seeing significant goods from China hitting the shelves again. And we have the pre-buying stuff that we're probably gobbling through right now. So best guess is we're seeing some blank shelves in June, and then we're starting to see them refill mid to the end of July. So the good news is the fix is likely in. It's on its way. But what's that going to do to consumer sentiment? Going to the store and seeing empty shelves, not being able to get what you need, for your family or what you're planning on buying, could really freak people out some more. And when we already have 24% of Americans pumping the brakes on major purchases like cars and houses, we could see more pumping the brakes. So best guess is mid to late July to see some shortages.
Yeah, well, simultaneous to that, Rich, is even along with those shortages, are those replenishment of supplies that are hitting the shelves that we can anticipate will cost 30% more based on the
Correct.
existing tariff, which again is a tax that we pay. We're not charging the exporting country. And it's it's funny how it's presented in the media is it sounds like, oh, great, this is just 30%. We're down 115% because there was once a 145% tariff. Well, now it's down 115%. It's only 30%. So it seems nominal. It's all perspective, right? Like,
Yeah.
so are we prepared to pay 30% more? And I think that, that CPI reading that's going to come out in August or maybe even September is going to be more of an indicator of, what the impact of these tariffs really were, um, and what they're going to be in terms of, whether the Fed really feels like there is stability in inflation.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that even in conversations with people doing listing presentations. Where I'm getting a ton of listing calls right now, so we're seeing new listings flood to the market, but we're seeing a lower number of closed sales. So listings are rising, sales are dropping. We're seeing a delta there that is cooling the market and potentially going to lead to downward price pressure. The anticipation, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. The anticipation would be that if we see the CPI numbers deteriorate, which would mean the CPI going up, showing inflation, and we see the GDP numbers coming down, which we'll talk more about in a minute, that the Fed might cut rates. But again, for our folks that don't watch every time, Dave, say, and I don't think this is going to be the case actually, folks, but
Mhm.
say at the next Fed meeting, they drop a quarter point. Do we see a quarter point come off our mortgage interest rates?
I would say no, not in the short term. I would say if it's highly anticipated that that rate's already baked in, I think what we're seeing is, we still need it's based on the 30-year mortgage-backed security bond market, and we're just not seeing the flow of cash or the purchase of those mortgage-backed securities at a rate that's going to lower our mortgage rate. So I think there's a anticipation, and Rich, you and I talked about this offline. There's, multiple anticipations about how many times the remainder of the year we might see the Fed's lower rates. Some say a 0.5%, some say a full percentage point by the end of the year. So it's a mixed bag. So what does that mean for a potential buyer or even sellers that are hoping that rates, come down to increase the buyer pool? Right now, we're still hovering in the high 6% interest rates for most buyers based on credit, income, and other criteria. I, genuinely believe that if we see an improvement in rates by the end of summer or the second half of this year, I still think we're going to be below, 6.5 would be considered a good rate, or below 6.5, but still above 6. So
Yeah.
we're not going to see, a major decrease. So if you're a potential buyer and you're thinking, oh, we're going to see 4% or, mid five rates, don't hold your breath.
No, because the mechanism that's going to work there is the Fed will lower that federal funds rate, which will maybe hopefully stimulate the economy, get things moving again. But we need people to start buying bonds. Basically, we need people to move into the bond market, which they normally would have done already because of all this uncertainty. But there was so much uncertainty, they skipped over bonds and went to cash. With the federal funds rate being so high, our yield on cash and our high yield savings accounts is pretty darn good. So sitting
Yeah.
in cash versus sitting in a bond, the cash is even safer, and the yield spread, the difference between the bond and the high yield savings account, isn't that much. So sitting in cash is actually the safer move for people right now. If it continues to be the safer move for people and they just sit in cash, then we're not going to see that movement in the mortgage interest rate. So the Fed has to drop the federal funds rate enough that people start looking at their high yield savings accounts where they stuffed all their cash, or their brokerage accounts where they're getting like the scrape or whatever they do in those.
Yeah.
They're seeing the yields come down on that and thinking, oh, darn it, I'm not really making any money on that. I'm going to move into the bond market. And
Yeah.
that's when we'll really see that start to happen. Yeah, Dave?
Yeah, and simultaneous to that would be if they want to, and then again, another lever that they pull, which you briefly talked about, is the Feds could reinstitute some type of bond buying program to
Yeah. And
lower
they move the money
mortgage
in.
rates. But on top of their dual mandate, it's also we don't want to add debt to the balance sheet, and that's what they're trying to avoid as well. So there could be a point in time where the Fed's lower rate, we don't see a relief in mortgage rates, which the Fed, I don't know, is terribly concerned about. But if there is some pain points and some pressure in the housing market, we could see some type of, bond type buying program come out that would artificially lower mortgage rates. But again, that's not going to be don't think that if that happens, we're going to be in the fours. It's just going to be, an incremental benefit to mortgage rates.
Yeah, because they also have to be mindful of the fact that at the same time, unemployment is likely going to continue to go up because of the trade war, depending on how that all shakes out. And they have to be careful about what they do, which levers they pull. They're a little stuck right now, which is why they didn't do anything at the last meeting. And I think my guess is, my prediction is, for the Fed's next meeting, we aren't going to probably see another reduction. I think the numbers are still going to be weird. The effects are still not going to be super clear in the data. And so I think it'll be 2 meetings from now before we see first reduction. So there we go. I'm on record. You guys can see if I'm right or wrong. What's your sense, Dave? Are you calling next meeting or one after?
I'm kind of calling next meeting, but I could see if they want to wait. It's kind of like dating, right? You don't want to propose and agree to get married until you've gone on a few more dates. So you want to see how that all turns
Yeah.
out, right? Like, I think that's kind of where the Fed's stance is let's, it's a lagging indicator. Let's wait and see if everything is still looking good and we're trending in the right direction. If that's the case, we pull the lever. I just get the sense that I don't, and you mentioned it at the last meeting that the Fed, Jerome Powell doesn't succumb to political pressure. He's just based on the numbers and the data. But I think that if, that we were at 2.4, the last CPI number, we're at 2.3. If there seems to be some stability in the tariffs by the next Fed meeting, that I think they might lower. So flip a coin on that is,
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, and we'd love to see some stability in the tariffs by then. I'd love to be wrong about that and see that rate start to come down. So let's talk about some of the stuff coming up in July that I think is brewing up kind of a perfect storm, potentially, depending on how we all react to it, for house prices. Because I believe we're going to see home prices decline quicker than we're going to see mortgage rates decline. We're already seeing the setup in the data for home prices to decline, which is that year over year we're seeing a large increase. In our local markets here, anywhere from 20 to 30% increase in new active listings, and anywhere from a 12 to 30% decrease in closed home sales, making a wide delta between what's coming on the market and what's getting sold off. So inventory stacking up. Inventory in Placerville up 69% year over year. Inventory in Pollock Pines up 67% year over year. These things are starting to stack up in a way that says more listings coming to market, less buyers coming to market, which in general is going to put downward pressure on the prices. So I think we will see prices start to move even potentially before mortgage interest rates, because we need the Fed to move on the Fed funds rate. We need some things to happen in the bond market before we can see those mortgage interest rates come down. But the confidence in the market affects the home prices much more quickly. And there's some stuff coming up in July that could affect confidence. So we talked about one of them, which is between now and July, we could see some empty shelves. Like I said, strap in, hang in there. The boat should start moving again. I don't think it's going to be a long-term, empty shelves situation, but I think it's going to freak some people out a little bit. We have the Liberation Day tariffs that have been paused for 90 days. That pause comes off on July the 9th. So to Dave's point, we could see stability in the trade war where he locks down enough, the president or the trade commerce secretary locks down enough trade deals with enough countries that are on that tariff list that they keep them paused or wipe them out altogether in favor of a new trade deal. If that doesn't happen, though, and those tariffs do unpause, and it doesn't matter if they unpause for one day, so the stock market plummets, and then they repause the next day and it shoots back up. Again, that will erode consumer sentiment. It'll jangle everybody's nerves, and it will cause more fear and uncertainty and doubt, and it will affect the market. So we'll see some empty shelves in June, and then we'll roll into potential tariff chaos in July. And the only thing that really presents that is, like I said, today's point, he locks up enough good trade deals that he's happy with before that he stops it before we even get to that number. So people have some
Yeah.
certainty.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to bring up, Rich, is when we're talking about a trade deal, the tariffs are really a short-term, um, really tool that the White House is using to encourage and motivate rapid trade agreements with countries that we want to have better deals with. So the best way to do that in the short term, I shouldn't say the best way, the quickest way to create the environment where you get folks talking, and we're now having, meetings and trade deal meetings, and apparently a trade deal has been put in place with the UK already, and other countries are lined up ready to do so. So we might see many tariffs go away, and we might see some tariffs increase or decrease just based on the progress of those trade deals. And so that's what I anticipate to see by July 9th. And it's one of those where if 50% of the players come to the table and there's a trade deal, that might be enough uh, positive sentiment in the economy that says we're making good progress. Um,
And we
so
could see numbers that support that. I think depending on the level of goodwill you ascribe to the motivations of the White House at this moment will depend on what you think about that statement or the 15 other versions of what these people's motivations are that you can get online. And I think it's good to take all those perspectives in, because as we saw with the CPI data, well, the world didn't completely go to hell yet. The economy, and everybody was saying it was gonna, so it didn't happen yet. Do we think it's still kind of marching towards a bad place? Yeah, but none of this is shaking out as predictably as we think. And so I think, regardless of what the motivations for these tariffs are, if to Dave's point, we get some early clarity and stability on them, that's kind of all the trade deal. I don't even think, and give me your opinion on this. I don't think the actual terms of the deal matter. I think
no,
having the deal in place and the tariffs out of place and the chaos stopped is what actually matters. Wherever
I
the numbers settle don't matter. We just
right.
need the White House to stop tweaking the knobs on the economy.
Right. And the White House to come out and say, we feel good about this trade deal, and
And
really
we're done messing
independent.
with this.
Yes, and independent to the consumer, because those trade deals and the ones that are in place, there's no real data that's put out there on what exactly those trade deals are. That's not exciting news. That's,
Yeah. And nobody
minutia.
buys a car or a house or doesn't buy a car or a house based on our trade deal with Madagascar or China or, Shanghai and, or any of these places. Right. So nobody cares about the trade deal. They care about the uncertainty and the craziness and the chaos.
Right. And I think the other piece that's leading to a little bit of even the benefit is the willingness to make adjustments to these tariffs and to pause them and restart them. And that just means nothing is 100%, right? There's not a final, line in the sand that says it's all or nothing. So that gives
Yeah.
the idea that there is some flexibility and that not everything's just going to be shut down.
Yeah. But it also gives the sense that I don't know what's going to happen next. And
That too. Yes.
that's what
Yeah.
keeps it going. So,
Yeah.
uh, the,
Maybe our podcast could be the uncertainty news or the uncertainty information. Because, I love that you and I give our predictions and we know what's going to happen. And but this is the way it's always been. We're waiting until the next set of economic data comes out or the next headline really affects our market and what we're doing. And so hopefully what we talk about next week is on a level course to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think I think what you just said there is a really good lesson for how to approach these things and what we're trying to bring to you, which is let's talk about the data and the numbers and not the headline. So if you went
Mhm.
out and looked at like what I was talking about with the container ships, other shows are presenting this as there are 0 ships en route from China right now, which is a reasonably ish true statement for 12 hours last Friday, right? Like, but since then, some ships have left port. That was a 12-hour period. Is it significant? Do we need to talk about its impact? Yes. But do we need to give the impression that all trade has stopped completely today and the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket? No. So we're trying to present to you the actual data. And the more you sort of engage and make decisions based on the data rather than the headlines, regardless of where on the spectrum you get your news, the better financial decisions you're going to make, and that's what we're trying to help you to get to.
Yeah, and we're trying to
So
help digest that information in terms that we actually can relate to, and home buyers and home sellers can relate to as well.
yeah, so we've got the empty shelves potential in June. We've got the potential of the Liberation Day tariffs coming unpaused on July 9th, or some ensuing chaos around that's coming up. Is he going to unpause them? Is he not going to unpause? Whatever. We've got that going on July 9th. The China tariffs that were 145% that just yesterday got reduced to 30%, but there's still, that is, I think one thing to remember is that the president set what we call a negotiating extreme anchor. So if you're going to go try to beat up the guy at the car dealership and he's asking 30 grand for the car, you offer him 10 grand. You've set an extreme anchor. You in the negotiation are much more likely to get to your number and to a lower end number by setting that extreme anchor. Unfortunately, instead of that 145% being a negotiation with China, it's a negotiation with you and I, because you and I are the ones paying the tax. So you and I, as American citizens, we're just like, oh God, everything from China is going to be 145% more. Woo, now it's only going to be 30%. Well, everything's still going to be 30% more, and there are still going to be follow-on effects from that, depending on what they finally determine in a trade deal. But those tariffs, that reduction to 30%, goes back to 145% conceivably on August the 12th. So just outside of that July timeline. And then we are still waiting on the Q2 GDP data. So we throw a bunch of acronyms at you. That CPI is Consumer Price Index, but more important is the GDP, the gross domestic product, because that is what determines whether we are in recession or not. You've heard Dave and I say we think we are essentially acting in recessionary ways. We are in a recessionary economy already, but the technical definition, which people are quick to make sure we remember in the comments section, is two consecutive quarters of GDP contraction or reduction, right? So we saw a reduction in Q1, first one in a heck of a long time. And so if the Q2 numbers come out and we see the GDP going down again, an economic contraction for the US, then that will put us officially in a recession. And then you will see the CNN ticker on the bottom of your screen go bright red, or the Fox News ticker go bright red and say, we're in a recession now. And then everybody will freak out even more. So that is a potential coming down the road if we see the GDP numbers. Again, those GDP numbers might not be super bad, but if they're down at all, it means recession, and that will affect the confidence in the market. And that's at the end of July.
Yeah, and we might not find out till 3 months even further down the road in October for them to, for it to come out and say, well, GDP is improving, we're higher. We were in a recession without having formally said that we were in a recession. So
yeah,
a lot
because
of
there's a
times,
first estimate and then a second estimate. And so it depends on
yeah,
how those numbers shake out and how confident they are in those numbers at the time.
yeah, and oftentimes a recession is clarified after the fact, and we could already be out of it when they're clarifying it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And what's more important again is how everybody responds to that, right? So you have the empty shelves that might freak people out. You have the tariff business that might freak people out. You have the second round of tariff business that might freak people out. And you have the GDP numbers that could mean we're officially in a recession. That's a lot for people to freak out about, where we already have number of listings going up and number of closed sales going down. All of that freaking out could cause buyers to pump the brakes, and that could cause more disparity in those numbers and downward price pressure on houses. So the housing market is in some ways a little more susceptible to the emotions of this than the overall economy is. The whole economy is a confidence-based economy, but the housing market could see those results faster if all of these things keep freaking people out. So as a general rule, if we all want the economy to go better, we want to freak out as little as possible and kind of keep spending and living our lives as best we can while being reasonable and safe for our families. And that leads into, how do you decide if you're a seller or buyer, whether now is the right time to buy or not? And so for that, we again would point you back to our 5 fundamentals. So if you're an on the ragged edge buyer, if you're barely able to make this happen, a home person, it's going to keep you really strapped. Well, in an environment where home prices might be coming down and people might be losing jobs, then pumping the brakes and staying on the fence might be a really wise decision. However, and I'll bump it over to Dave, who's got some reasons he was working through offline with us why this could be a good opportunity. If you are a well-qualified buyer, so you have stable employment, you have good savings, so you can cover your down payment, your closing costs, you have an emergency fund of 6 months or more, so that on day one when you buy your house, you're not tapped out and you happen to lose a job and have to find another job, you've got your bills covered, you've got good credit, and you've got a long-term time horizon, right? Even if we see some losses this year, those will be paper losses for you because you plan on keeping this house for 5 to 10 years. If you meet those 5 criteria, then this could be a buying opportunity for you. So Dave, what are some of the things you think might represent a buying opportunity as these market forces, persist for people?
Yeah, and what I'm seeing, Rich, is a couple things. And I'll ask you here in a minute what you view as balanced inventory levels. But we are seeing it is now the selling season. I'm seeing for sale signs, pop up all over the place. But my phone's not ringing with extra buyers to, for every time I see a for sale sign, I don't know that there's an increase in buyers. But I also think home sellers, a couple things that we've talked about on this podcast are that they are done waiting for mortgage rates to come back down to pandemic level mortgage rates. They've sat on their rate. They wanted to move for some time. There was life reasons, factors that wanted to motivate them to move, whether it was grandchildren or downsizing or moving out of state or to a different location. They just were holding on to that 3% mortgage rate and they didn't want to move. But I think the point has come now where the values come up so much of their homes that they are willing to, if they need to rebuy, pay a higher mortgage rate than they have now and take
Yeah.
advantage of the equity that they have in their home. Because you could wait a year, you could wait 2 years, and if the value in your home comes down $100,000, then that 2% higher that you paid in a mortgage rate is going to take 10 years to make up that $100,000. So
Yeah.
the other thing that I'm wondering if you're seeing too, Rich, if I'm someone that's thinking about selling and I'm starting to see more for sale signs, that creates a little bit of panic. Like, oh shoot, my neighbor's selling their house, the other neighbor's selling my house. I got to go now because if I wait, there might be 10 other neighbors with their house on the market.
Yeah,
Um,
there's always that psychological effect, and you see, I'll have buyers ask me, "Is there something wrong with this neighborhood?"
yeah,
Because you'll get 5, 6 houses on the same street and in the same neighborhood for sale, but it's that effect you're talking about, where people have been thinking about it, they've been planning, and then they start to see people move into the market, and then they get a little FOMO, like, "Oh, I'm
yeah,
I'm going to miss out on the highest prices, if I don't move into the market." And depending on the market, they might be right. In this market, I think they are right because I think we're likely
yeah,
to see price declines. If you're in an appreciating market, then sometimes better sit back, let your neighbors get the lower
sure,
prices and set a new comp, and then you get a higher price. But I think in this market, we're likely to post up losses by the end of the year, and so moving to market quickly makes sense. I think people are getting that message even just through the sort of general fear and anxiety in the legacy media headlines,
yeah,
which are designed to do that to you, by the way. So try to resist that as much as you can. But um, so I think people are moving to market more quickly, and
yeah. And if you're a
generally,
buyer, yeah,
let's
and
go
if
ahead.
you're a buyer now, you have more options and flexibility. And if there's some similar homes, there's this not this one unicorn home that you have to have. You do have options, and just because a house is listed at a price doesn't mean you need to offer that price.
Or
And if
compete with 5 other people and offer 40 grand more than that price, which is the type of environment we've been in several times in the last 5 years.
yes, and where that sense of urgency is as a buyer, I don't, I could take my time and I think from a seller's perspective, and Rich, we talked about this. You've met with sellers, and it was great to hear you tell me that you met with a seller recently that said, "Well, I could either price my house correctly now, or I could wait 5 months and do a couple price reductions." Right? Like,
Yeah. And
you
that's
know,
a hard pill to swallow in this kind of environment when you come to market, and if you miss on price and you're not selling, then you're in that spot of deciding, do I take a few percentage points hits now, or do I wait and see how much of a hit I take between the sort of dual butt whooping of prices coming down and my listing getting long in the tooth to where people start to lowball me. And that those are hard decisions to make, and there's a lot of art to that, in this kind of environment where you are believing that prices are likely to come down, but you're not seeing them come down yet. But the buyers are believing the same thing you're believing, and everybody's getting a little weird. The market's a little bit like a junior high dance right now. There's all the boys are on one side, all the girls are on the other side, and there's only a few brave souls who are going to move into the middle and start the action, right? So that's kind of what's going on. And in this case, you've got the buyers on this wall and the sellers on this wall, and it is the sellers that are being the brave souls and moving to the middle and starting the dance right now, not the buyers. And it's been the buyers for the
yeah.
last 5 years, and that's that shift you're feeling in the market.
Yeah, and so what
But
are you seeing today in terms of, moving more to a balanced inventory level? What do you see in terms of inventory levels, how they're creeping up, and where will you expect to be, maybe, next time we meet here?
yeah, and I think depending on where you get your information online, you got to be careful. If you're looking at month over month numbers, there could be some fudge factor in there because we're in the ramp up to the summer selling season. So month over month, this time of year, we always see big jumps in inventory. The buyer pool's kids aren't out of school yet, and so we don't always see those listings getting gobbled up right away until end of May, early June, when the kids get out of school. So this time of year, we always see a ramp up in inventory. So it's the year over year numbers you should focus on. Those ones are going to tell the tale. And year over year, we're seeing big jumps in inventory. Like I said, up like 69% Placerville, 67% Pollock Pines. What that equates to in terms of months of inventory, when we say months of inventory, that means at the rate that houses are selling, based on the number of houses I have for sale right now. If no more houses came on the market after today, I'd be done selling houses in this amount of time. For most of the time since the March lockdown of 2020, we've had 2 months or less in most markets here in El Dorado County of inventory. Right now, we're seeing 3 and 4 months of inventory, so essentially doubling in inventory or more in the case of Placerville and Pollock Pines, like I said. And so what that means is a strong seller's market is 2 months or less of inventory. A neutral market by the numbers is 3 to 6 months of inventory. But in my experience, 20 years working here, it kind of lags a bit. It takes a while for people to let go of that old market mechanic. So I really don't see real neutral market behavior until we get in that 4 to 6 months of inventory,
Yeah, and
and we're
what
just starting to get there.
yeah, and Rich, just off the top of your head, when's the last time we saw a buyer's market, a full buyer's market? Would you just, if you had to?
Oh my God. I would say what, 2011 to 2018, maybe.
Okay. Yep.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah,
sorry,
and
that
so
was a recovery. That was when it
yeah,
shifted. I mean, the best buyer's market we would have seen was 2008 to 2011. The recovery started in 2012. So
yep,
2008 to 2011 was the best buyer's market in
yep.
my career. And that would have been 18 months of inventory at
Sure,
that time,
and but
to
even
some 36 in some places.
yeah, but even
Yeah.
pre-pandemic, it was more of a balanced market. It's fair to say, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that recovery that happened like 2012
Mhm.
to 2020, we had a good run up there where it was still a buyer's market to a balanced market, and it really didn't get that strong shift to seller's market until the lockdown and all
Right.
the pandemic craziness. So, and even in 2018, 2019, we were starting to see some signs that the market was cooling off from the Great Recession recovery, and I
Yeah.
actually was believing we were on our way to a declining market again for a little bit, because California goes in 10-year cycles, give or
Mhm.
take. But COVID disrupted that cycle.
Yeah. So I think for a seller here is it's been a long time since we've seen a buyer's market, right? And as a seller's market, your recent memory is I put my house on the market 30 days, maybe 60 days tops. I got multiple offers.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and for a while there, 7 days, 15 days,
yes.
I've got
Yeah.
multiple offers.
And I think now we're getting to the point where it doesn't mean you freak out if you list your house in 30 within 30 days, you don't have an offer. You just have to be prepared that, this is a longer term deal. This is back to normal. But we
Yeah.
forget that. Kind of like a buyer that had a low interest rate, you forget like that, 6% rates, 15 years ago were good rates. Um,
Well, and our whole first time buyer pool that bought from 2020 to now have literally in their life never been paying attention to real estate in a buyer's market. It's not even part of their like
right,
cultural or financial history. So for them, this
right.
is going to be a real big shock because they bought their house. If you bought your first house in 2021, it's insane. People were waiving contingencies. Houses were closing in 7 days. This is what you experienced, and you had to just give everything to the seller just to be the one who wins. And then you call me up in October of 2025, and I'm like, well, there's a ton of inventory, and most people are experiencing a couple of price reductions. There's only going to be one buyer competing at any one time, and they're probably going to come in under asking. That's a big shock to the system, and
Yeah.
the everybody needs some time to adjust to that. I feel for them. They need some time to adjust before the market settles out. And this year is going to be that shakeup for people, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I see that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we weren't as big of an issue previously over the last several years were contingent buyers. A contingent buyer still made up a good portion of the buyer pool. If I'm a seller now and I'm taking 60, 90 days to sell my house, well, if someone that's buying my house also has a house to sell, they're in the same boat and it may take longer. A year ago, 2 years ago, if a contingent buyer came in, made an offer as a seller, you felt pretty confident, especially if their agent did their job, due diligence, showed that their house was priced right, it was on the market, that, okay, I feel good about these buyers, and I also feel good that their house is going to sell in a timely manner. I mean, that's
Yeah, and that dynamics is going to shift. Contingent offers are always sort of facing headwinds. So when there's multiple offers, who's going to take contingent offer? You're just going to take the non-contingent offer. Now the market's shifting. You're like, great, I can move in with my contingent offer. But then to your point, as those on market times get long in the tooth, nobody's willing to commit to a 7-month sales cycle if they got
Right.
to wait 3 for you and 3 for them, so it can get a little dicier. So the contingent offers, honestly, right now in this
Yeah.
moment when the market's in transition, where there's not too much pressure either way, this neutral market and the on market times haven't gotten too long, this is kind of probably the sweet spot in the market for a contingent buyer
Mhm.
in the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
And ironically, I have just done at the end of last year, I did 2 back-to-back contingents, and I just finished up 2 contingents here. Both went really well. But when we start to get really long on market times, then we're going to see people get a little reticent about those contingent offers.
Yeah.
So that is something that's coming up. So all that is to say, if you are a buyer, if you meet those 5 criteria, you're well capitalized buyer. There are opportunities coming up here where you're not going to be competing with a lot of people, where you might actually, for the first time in years, be able to successfully pull off a below asking offer. You might not have to give away all the terms to the seller. You might be able to get pretty neutral, pretty friendly terms from the seller. So this represents a buying opportunity, and it does as over the rest of the course of the year. I think this represents a good buying opportunity for people who are well capitalized. If you're that on the fence, can barely make it buyer, or you don't have stable employment, you're nervous about your employment right now, this is not the market to try to mess around and find out, and you should probably pause for a little bit. When it comes to sellers, usually, here's my standard advice. When you hire me, it's my job to get you the very most I can get you for your home at that moment. So when you list, what time of year you list, is not that big of a deal. I'll go to work and I'll get you the best I can get you for your property. So I'm not one of these people who says you got to sell in the summer or sell over the holidays, because then there's less people looking, have more competition. There are pros and cons to any time you sell. So I always tell people the best time to sell your home is when you can handle it. So if you got kids in school and it's too much chaos, and summer is when you can handle it, sell in summer. Or if summer, you've got the kids at home with you, and so you can't pack a darn thing because you're dealing with these kids, then sell in spring or winter when the kids are in school. Or if you've got a big work project coming up that is just so stressful, wait until after the work project. Timing it for your life when it comes to selling is the best time to sell. Is the most important and best way to make that decision. However, in this particular market where we believe we're going to post up losses by the end of the year, that advice is still true. That's the best time to sell your house. But if you're asking, when will I get the most money for my house? That was probably last month. And the second best time is as soon as you can bring it to market in a market like this. So you have to balance those two forces. When does it work for my family? But also not waiting too long till we're actually posting up losses in the data, because by the time the losses wash out in the data, by the time we're able to show you the data, then the losses are going to start to compound and you'll lose more waiting. So that's my 30,000 foot view of who should be thinking about buying or selling right now. Anything to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, I just think as someone that's bought and sold a lot of houses myself here, and for those folks that are considering selling their home, is greed right now is not great. If you price your house properly, if you really want to sell your house, list it at the right price, put it on the market, and you most likely will sell it. We got some really, a lot of equity gains over the last several years, and it's really hard to time everything perfectly.
Yeah.
I equate it to buying stocks and selling stocks. Did you buy it at the lowest price and sell at the highest price? No. But if you bought it at a relatively low price and you're buying it for a significant amount more, or selling it for a significant amount more than you bought it for, you're doing pretty good. And you could look back and say, well, shoot, I should have sold my house 3 months ago. I might have made 10,000 more, 20,000 more. No one's got a crystal ball. Like, you don't put that pressure on yourself because you didn't know. If you knew, you would have done it. Right.
Yeah.
And we
Don't
always know
torture
what happens.
yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of like these economic indicators that we're talking about the Federal Reserve use. They use trailing numbers to make these decisions. They could tell you, they got hindsight to use, so that's
Yeah.
just my advice is, take the gains you got, don't be greedy, list it at a fair price, and you'll move your house and get on with your life.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in a market where we expect some declines, that is good advice. Listing too high and staying too long hurts you more than coming in at the right price right away. By the way, this is a little regionally specific. Dave and I Dave can write loans in all of California, all of Nevada. And I can technically sell all of California, but I only really sell these 4 or 5 counties right here: Sacramento, El Dorado, Amador, and Placer, and Nevada counties. That is 5. In our area, we are a market pricing market, so we bring our listings to market if we're a good realtor at market value. There are other, if you're watching this from the Bay Area and you're about to listen to the Bay Area and move here, which a lot of you, a huge percentage of us, of our clients move from the Bay Area. It's a totally different ballgame. People, I dislike the way they do it, but they massively underprice listings in the Bay Area and expect to get 6 figures over asking. And it's kind of a game. It's hard on buyers because the buyers see a house and then at a price that is within their range, but then it's going to get bid up $100,000, so you do have to work with somebody local, somebody who understands your market. Cause we're saying come in at market value and stick there. And that is appropriate and works in our markets. But just like I always say, there's no blanket advice that's any good advice in real estate. If you're in an underpricing market like the Bay Area, then coming in at market value right now would be a terrible idea and would shoot you in the foot. So if you're in our market, have us out and we'll give you some great advice. And if you're not in our market, call your trusted professional. If you don't have one, we can refer you to one, but get some local advice when it comes to how to approach your pricing for where you live, since you might be watching from somewhere else.
Instead of my 2 cents, I gave my 4 cents. So I'm good. Thanks, Rich.
That's right. All right, guys. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for making it to the end with us. And we'll see you on the next one. I'm Rich Curtis.
And I'm Dave Miller. Thanks.
Bye, guys.